So for the keynote today, we have Julia Brown, who is the VP, let me just get it right, VP of Software Product and Strategy at BlackRock. She was previously the CEO of MindX, which was acquired by BlackRock last year. And she has Hopkins ties. So she was one of the founding members of the Johns Hopkins Medicine Technology Innovation Center. And so today you guys are going to hear her give an overview on the field in a talk which is delivering on the promise of neurotechnology. So with that, let's leave it up to Julia.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Mark and Cecilia, and all the other folks from the team this morning who put on this event. It's very exciting. I think not that long ago, there wasn't really a translational neurotech student body, certainly, and definitely not that much focus on entrepreneurship and how to drive the field forward. So it's wonderful to be here with you all today. All right. And so delivering on the promise of neurotechnology is an ambitious title, I think, for this talk, but I think really kind of gets to the heart of what motivates me the most about the work I do every day. And I think what motivates most of the people in this field is really looking at the promise of both building extraordinary technology with extraordinary potential for patient impact. So similarly, I was reflecting on what would be the most kind of interesting and useful topic for us today. And I assume you guys get lectured pretty frequently on neural decoding strategies and electrophysiology, and figured we would skip some of that and talk about how to do a neurotech startup out of Hopkins, which is something that I have a good deal of personal experience with. And I also want to keep this as valuable for you and informal as you would like. So I'll pause a few times to ask for, see if anyone has any questions, and please feel free to really ask anything that comes to mind. Sorry, I'm used to having a hand held microphone, so I'm going to try not to turn away from this too many times. But all the work that I'm going to talk about that I've done at MindX and that my colleagues have done at MindX and at BlackRock Neurotech is really building on many, many years of academic research in the space. And so certainly any success that we have is really their success as well. So, and I'm assuming, just show of hands, everyone knows what a brain computer interface is here. So just to briefly just kind of recap, this is not a brand new technology. In the 90s is when we had kind of the very first implanted proof of concepts. And then in the 2000s or early 2000s, cyberkinetics and John Donahue's work for the BrainGate trials and everything that kind of launched all this excitement around the first time a tetraplegic patient was able to control a cursor with their mind, and then all the work that DARPA has funded in the last 25-ish years since then. Wow, time flies. In particular, revolutionizing prosthetics, which Brock was involved in. I think almost everyone that all of my colleagues were funded by DARPA's RP program at one point or another. And then in the 2010s, DARPA continues again to be one of the biggest funders of this, this effort. My co-founder at MindX, which I'll get to in a second, but we launched out of Hopkins Applied Physics Labs in around late 2017. Colonel Dr. Jeff Lang, he was one of the kind of founding members of the Revolutionizing Prosthetics effort. He had just gotten back from his overseas, kind of deployment, and was, incredibly motivated by a desire to help, soldiers who were wounded, in the line of service, and had this really brilliant, kind of pitch for DARPA around how we could use, signals directly from the brain to control prosthetic limbs and to create this much more autonomous future for people who were struggling with various mobility impairments. So I'll skip ahead a little bit here. So that's basically where MindX got started. Like many startups, was a bunch of conversations and late nights with a loose group of people, none of whom had quit their day jobs yet. My background academically was in computational biology. I'd also done some stints at a social good venture capital company, dropped out of my graduate school in order to help start the Technology Innovation Center for Johns Hopkins Medicine. So generally speaking, was not very patient and very excited about doing anything I could to be involved in solving big problems with technology. So specifically was mostly doing a lot of software development and data science and partnering with brilliant clinicians, scientists, subject matter experts at Hawkins in particular during that time. So the Technology Innovation Center, just as a background, is anyone familiar with the group? Okay, one or two. So that is more purely within Johns Hopkins Medicine, but has a lot of partnerships with the Carey School of Business and the Whiting School of Engineering, and is if you are interested in joining an entrepreneurial effort out of the Hopkins ecosystem, be happy to connect with you later and help you get synced up with them. They're always looking for people who are excited about a particular type of technology or have real insight into a clinical patient impact to kind of partner and look at how we can translate technology out of the university. So that's what I was doing for many years, is looking at Nathan Crone had an idea for how we could do epilepsy monitoring and seizure detection on an Apple Watch. Basically focus on that, wrote my first iOS app to help do that, and we worked very closely with Apple on delivering what ended up also being the first research kit app within that ecosystem, EpiWatch, which is now a company as well. Did work in sepsis detection and monitoring, AI for clinical decision support, pretty much everything that kind of touches the patient ecosystem. So that's definitely a great resource. If you are not connected with them, would encourage it. So 2017 was a really interesting time. Elon Musk had just launched Neuralink, and Brian Johnson had started a company called Kernel the year before. We had Mark Zuckerberg getting excited about the future of brain-computer interfaces as the future of human-computer interfacing itself. And he and Regina Dugan had launched the Edgefield project. Basically, the whole space was really starting to heat up. We didn't have too many technologies that had really been vetted other than really the cyberkinetics turned BlackRock Neurotech's Utah array, which is a microelectrode array that requires a cradiotomy and is implanted into the cortex. But that does give us incredible data and had enabled a lot of these demonstrations that really do feel like magic when you see them. You have someone who is just completely still, immobilized, unable to interact with the world around them. And all of a sudden, you see them see a cursor start to move on the screen. They can click around. They can call their mom. They can order, watch something on Netflix. That's one of the coolest experiences that I ever had in my life. And I think Brock, you were working on the Harmony effort around that time as well. I think that's the first time that we met. Yeah. And then I'll mention Jacob Vogelstein, who actually is an alumni of this program, and then also a professor, possibly also in this program, and then had just started a venture fund at Camden Partners. And he and I had worked on getting funding basically for a few different startups here, and started talking with Jeff around, this is the coolest thing that anyone's ever seen. And the Harmony effort in particular was looking at what's the most effective strategy for making a always-on real-world use brain-computer interface for individuals with tetraplegia in particular. And that was really, really exciting. My background being more software than hardware, it was a really interesting time to look at both kind of the funding coming together in the space and a technology method that could enable these hardware developers to successfully go to market and to have clinical endpoints that they could prove against for the FDA. So that was the Gap, who is a brilliant neuroscientist currently running NIH programs now. She's really, really fantastic. So I'll refer back to this slide a few times, but I kind of wanted to just give you also as transparent and honest kind of just a perspective of what it was like to both start a company out of this ecosystem, what kind of the development points looked like. I will try not to run on too much about any details, but feel free to let me know if you have any questions. So going back to this problem of we have a couple companies that have created a brain-computer interface, Neuralink's technology, again, also very invasive, but with the ability to get very high spatial and temporal resolution data out of the brain. And also with a very charismatic leader in the form of Elon Musk. I think I have a random slide on this at some point, but I would say one important takeaway for if you're interested in starting a deep tech company It's definitely that it's not just about having, an incredible novel technology. I would say maybe even more important is the relationships that you build and can leverage momentum within the space, particularly in regards to financing and the timing. So definitely being able to kind of understand where the landscape is going, knowing what all of your kind of supply chain is going to look like, even if you don't know in detail, but being able to present that case. I'd say almost the three of those are more important for launching a successful deep tech initiative in the commercial space, which is very expensive. So, but back to what we really wanted to do here. Two hard problems in particular for making a brain-computer interface successful. And it's mostly because we just don't really understand how the brain works all that well. In particular, how information is distributed and encoded still, although this has really, we make incredible progress every year, I would say, across academia and the commercial space, but it is still incredibly difficult to do unconstrained, just patient-driven neural decoding with a high level of performance. So that was the key piece that we sought to solve. So our solution was to basically create a context engine that would transform what was just a generally, a very open-ended neural decoding space into a closed set solution problem. So if we can only get a couple of bits out of the brain, we don't need, hundreds and thousands of channels necessarily. We just need to really accurately be able to decode a up, down, left, right, a yes, no, a mother's name, father's name, child's name, a discrete set of classified actions or intentions. And we're able to do that really successfully if we combine our neural signal decoding with other biosignals or other contextual prompts. So we found that the most performant system is to include, really take this data-rich ecosystem. Don't just think of it as we need, the perfect novel algorithm to make a motor cortex decoding successful. We need a multimodal strategy, something that really leverages the very rich biosignals that we get out of the body. We've found the most successful strategy and the one that works best with our commercialization model to get a combination of eye signals and brain signals, which we called Look and Think, which was cutesy and kind of stupid at the same time. But it litters all of my pitch decks, for the first year of 2018, and was good enough to lock in a multi-million-dollar contract with Facebook's Reality Labs at the time. It's definitely important if you are a young startup to have some way to demonstrate that you can deliver on a very complicated engineering execution problem. And this was around when there was someone actually from APL who was running Facebook's Edgefield program at the time, which was really focused on how can we use electrophotography to successfully decode, again, in the same, very different from what Facebook does now, or Meta. But yeah, the Edgefield program was really fantastic. Largely DARPA and APL kind of fueled effort at the time. So I have a couple, this is a video of the very first demo we ever did with some software that we had written basically to do stereoparietal cortex signal decoding. We had trained with this individual, for maybe 3 minutes previously on this 4 option. And I know this does not look great, this UI. I think this UI was put together in about 2 days. But basically we wanted to look at if we, how quickly could we, what could this performance look like? So here on the bottom, if you can see my cursor, we have just a screen mounted eye tracker. And then we have here a BlackRock head stage. So this is using the Utah array implant, which is a wired connection. And this participant, you'll hear there's a researcher in the background who's telling her to look at a specific element on the screen and then to think a certain thing. And so I'll just play it for a second. It's loud. I'm not sure. Can you hear that? No. Okay, so the button will highlight when he says look, and then it will turn blue when there's a neural click that's decoded. Oh, lovely. Okay, sorry. So there we're just testing the eye tracker first. So I don't know why every time I go to pause it, it switches. But the main takeaway there is just the latency. So basically, as soon as he says it, we were able to accurately, decode the correct value. And if we go on to listen to the rest of this video, she's very, very excited by how quickly that happens. And in her, kind of experience and over the course of, the next few testing sessions that we did, she was able to decode it faster than what she thought she would be able to do. So being able to anticipate someone's intention as opposed to, even waiting for that, the lag of the translation to a physical click was a very, very exciting thing to have as an early milestone. Going back to what is kind of required to raise capital for a brand new startup. A few key things you want to be able to show. Can you recruit a strong team of people who are willing to quit their day jobs and join you on this venture? They had not all quit their jobs when I first, sent a pitch deck around, but they all definitely told me that they would, and that did end up working out. So there's always, again, there's this kind of weird interim period where if you're one of the founders, you do have to. It is very risky and honestly quite terrifying. Up until that point, I'd always had like multiple, kind of irons in the fire. Did one or two startups kind of on the side. This was the first one I quit everything else in my life to just do and take on some loans to do the initial startup capital and all that good stuff. But had a very good network of the folks from Hopkins Tech Transfer and from APL, an incredibly supportive ecosystem there. They were really able to help us with getting our initial funding from Camden Partners. So as we were working with partners there, they basically said, show us you can get a team, show us you can execute on engineering, and show us you can bring in other capital, and here you will have this $1 million check. That was kind of our early, pre-seed funding in that first year. From there, we really focused on how do we demonstrate that this is commercially viable. Investment standpoint, then the tens of millions of dollars that it requires to build good new hardware. And that's just for consumer hardware. That is not a medical device hardware. If you're going to do a brand new, if you're going to go build your own brain computer interface and take it through a clinical trial, you're looking at minimum of $25 million, which is a much bigger ask from an investor or from really, any funding source than that successfully before. Which in the case of Mindex, again, there was no commercial brain-computer interface that could solve these problems. BlackRock Neurotech is, again, really been, a partner along this, kind of path as the participant that I just showed. The only people who've ever been implanted, again, in a research setting, but have had those safely implanted for 8 years. And it is an incredibly valuable source for pushing this entire field forward. So and then in 2019, we were able to kind of build out our whole software system, which is called MindOS. And that was basically connecting a variety of different neural inputs, so both non-invasive, so electromyography, and invasive electrocorticography, microelectrode arrays, basically making a more general purpose neural signal decoding pipeline that could perform sensor fusion with smart home devices with a variety of different sensor inputs, and started out as a fairly unsophisticated state machine, but evolved over time into our initial prototype for contextual AI. Around that time, I'd spent a fair amount of time investing in how are we going to pay for the cost of computing for all the model training we had to do. I'm sure you are all aware of this, but another kind of big cost and big risk factor is it's incredibly expensive. It can be, up to $1 million a year, depending on how much data you're adjusting completely. It is a non-trivial undertaking. We were accepted as a great cloud computing provider and compute credits, and for free, which was pretty great. Would absolutely recommend leveraging that as well. And that was super critical for us to build out and deploy kind of our next phase, which was controlling a head-mounted display with a neural interface. And that we used what had recently come out with the Magic Leap. If anyone is familiar with that, it's basically an augmented reality headset. The goal there is that there's a market also, not just in the longer term for the tetraplegic population, but also in the more near term for gaming applications, for hands-free communication, hands-free interaction with the digital world in particular. So we're working with Valve, with folks at Microsoft, basically other big tech companies who are very happy to invest in the future of HCI. So this is one of our data scientists, Patrick. I'll go ahead and play this for a minute.
Even slower is better. All it is.
So, and this gray is the eye tracker when his eyes float over it, and then the blue is the click.
And they will give us minutes. Then I'm trying to play. Which turn?
So that's just a very short clip, but again, to show that we're able to get really still that same type of performance out of, electromyography, just a cuff basically, with a very, very small number of channels and something that's normally a very noisy type of artifact. So there's some exciting things happening at BlackRock now, with EMG as well, and not just with the Utah array, but looking at a company called Victim X, and which is there was a press release that recently just came out about that. So maybe we can send some of that stuff in a follow-up. But the next generation of rehabilitation therapies and brain computer interface development. So I will skip forward a little bit here. Ideally, and we could talk a little bit if anyone has any kind of questions about like the landscape piece. We could talk a bunch about some very exciting stuff from Synchron, Kernel, and Neuralink, kind of system BCI, but takes a similar approach. Right, combines another biosignal with their decoding strategy. So they're using eye tracking in their solution. It doesn't have the ability that a Utah array does to penetrate the cortex and to do single unit neuron recordings, but does get a similar signal type to what you would from electrocorticography or ECOG, which is a population neuronal imagined speech decoding. Even here with Nathan Krohn's lab and Annie Chang over at UCSF, that can be an incredibly good strategy for human-computer interaction with a BCI. So honestly, I think it's going to be very exciting to see how PL, this is on the next generation of non-invasive neural interfaces. So we partnered, and again, this is just kind of harkening back to how important the relationship development is here between tech transfer and yourself over time, both as a researcher and someone who just wants to translate technologies out of the space. As we were looking at, how could we make a more, kind of a vertically integrated product to take to market that's much more protectable. It's more attractive from an investment perspective. The PI over there has a great background in sensing technologies, many years, and I can send some links to some of his publications as well afterwards. He was looking at how can we get the same spatial and temporal resolution that we do from an ECOG signal with a non-invasive method. So that would be the holy grail, right? You don't need a craniotomy. We can just get all of that right through the skull. Normally the skull, really messes with the signal quality. Electrical signals don't translate well through the skull, which, basically acts as a volumetric kind of conductor for that, and the signal to noise ratio is very challenged as a result. So that's where you have, EEG. So he was looking at this fast optical signal. Can we see a shift in the tissue motion that is contemporaneous basically with the electrical signal passing through that group of neurons? So very exciting stuff. We licensed that from APL in 2020, I want to say, and started conducting a 2-year, basically, a development effort to do kind of initial human data. I have in the appendix a bunch of slides looking at all the kind of mouse data, and to me, it's at least very interesting stuff. I'll spare the detail there, but I'm happy to send that for additional reading if anyone wants to. In my opinion, that is 5 years away, and before that's going to be very viable. So that's still I would say a longer term strategy. But again, the ideal goal being patients don't have to get, not necessarily all patients, some patients will probably always need a craniotomy and invasive approach. But I think for the long term, for I think the future that we see for monitoring applications in particular around mental health and a few other, epilepsy, seizure detection, that sort of thing, definitely a non-invasive solution is going to be preferred. So yeah, in 2020, I raised a $5 million round from Catalio Capital Management, which is right down the street, and Revolution's Rise of the Rest Fund, which is Steve Case's fund in DC. That is probably the most wonderfully supportive venture fund I've ever worked with in my life. I mean, just the best people. They really care about the world and not just about making money. And I don't think I could really say that about, there's probably not too many other investors I would ever say that about, to be honest. Not that they aren't wonderful people, but that is very near and dear to the Rise of the Rest mission. Invest both in, kind of breakthrough technologies, but also really in people. and in investing in diversity and in areas that aren't just Silicon Valley. So I think from really looking at translating technology out of this ecosystem, two of the absolute best partners I could recommend. So I've put them on this side as well. And then in 2021, I guess, started raising a $15 million round to do kind of the next stage of development of the digital holographic imaging device, which I referenced earlier from APL. And in the process, started talking with Florian Schulzbacher and Marcus Gerhardt, for the founders of BlackRock Neurotech, and they had just recently raised their first, venture capital round very successfully. And we're looking at, how can BlackRock take this incredible, years and years, like 13 years of successful animal and human clinical study data. Again, really nothing else can touch that level of safety and use data at this point. I think it's something like 30,000 patient days, something along those lines, or patient hours of data, and people are able to use that successfully year over year, and it's been a really incredible part of their lives. So it was around that time that we're looking at, what do you want for the future? As you take VC dollars, there's a requirement to grow, pretty quickly, year over year, and to make sure you can return, that capital on that schedule. Looking at the way the kind of ecosystem was developing, there was a lot of consolidation. COVID had just happened, and so the landscape was looking a little different. And decided, BlackRock is ready to really commercialize, the first human BCI. They need software and they need an AI strategy, and we need hardware. And Florian and Marcus are good people. So ultimately, at the end of the day, I think that was what was most of interest to me, is partnering with people who have, really the same values. I will go ahead and skip to this.
When that robotic hand went closed like that, man, I come by. Yeah, I want to come out of that chair so bad.
I said my goal is to feed myself chocolate.
I firmly believe that we're at the onset of a revolution.
I was able to move the mouse around on the screen like it was me moving my hand with a mouse. It felt pretty awesome, I only imagine where the technology can lead.
We provide a neural interface platform that has a wide range of application. What we want to achieve and enable is that people can move again, feel again, talk again, hear again.
I think we'll have people playing the piano and being concert violinists.
Come on, seriously?
I think it goes back to the fundamental question of what you want to do with the time that you're given.
We're just at the right point and things are really taking off.
There you go.
Understanding our brain and also curing disabilities and mental health issues like depression is the real final frontier.
So it's a pretty exciting time. We are now, as a kind of joint force, both BlackRock and Mindex, working towards just what Florian mentioned, which is launching the first commercial BCI, a product we're calling Move Again, which Spencer is an absolutely integral part of making happen. And you'll hear from him a little bit later in the panel, but is bringing his incredible experience as a neuroscientist to making a motor cortex decoding solution viable in the real world. We're also looking leveraging another technology originally invented by Mindex advisor, Krishna Shenoy, who tragically passed a few weeks ago, which is definitely a loss felt very heavily by not just myself, but the rest of the community. But I would say we're very, very excited to continue investing in and bringing all of the incredible work that he and his folks at the Shenoy Lab have built in a kind of next generation communication device, which is currently TBD, titled Talk Again, but is really honestly one of the most impressive strategies I've seen for really robust, 26. So we'll send that information out in notes as well. Okay, so who is looking to start a neurotech company? Really? No? Brock?
Tempted, but actually, my question is related to that. You mentioned there are a lot of new into the space over the last 5 years thereabouts. Is it saturated yet? Is there still opportunity for something new to come in and
Oh, for sure. I would say in particular, there is, depending on what side we're looking for, but a lot of the hard problems have still not really been solved. We are getting so much closer year over year. It is a very expensive, kind of problem that we're looking to solve. So I think all of these different groups, investing in the space, everyone from Valve to to Microsoft to all of the great work that's happening in the Hawkins ecosystem, Stanford, Caltech, everyone is driving forward a different part of their solution. So both on the hardware side, I think in particular there is, an untapped and endless interest from investors in a non-invasive type of solution. So everyone on Earth wants the ability to integrate a true neural control without hands, like for VR, or understanding, what are some of the triggers for, mental illness. So a cause that's very, kind of near and dear to my heart. But certainly like the ability to understand like quantitatively what is the impact of a functions, how you feel. Those are, I would say, two spaces that are very, very active and from an investment standpoint, even with economic downturn and some of the shifts that we've been seeing a little bit in kind of that landscape. Does that answer your question? Yeah.
I have a question. So I'm curious to know what the moment was that you decided to actually take the idea and quit your day job and start this company. What was that like sort of watershed?
That's a great question. So I think I'd been kind of practicing up to that point a little bit. I had started just building an app, building a writing a licensing deal, something along those lines. And then built a program we called Hexsite. I actually don't know if it's still running here or not. But that was basically an accelerator with a woman, Jasmine McNeil here, to basically pair an engineer from Whiting and put them through like a 6-month program to here's how you build a company and also do it. And I'd basically taken operational roles in a couple of those companies just to really kind of help them out the door. So I'd taken a lot of kind of baby steps, I think, which really helped make that final kind of leap much easier. So definitely, I think the exposure is a critical part from going from, kind of one place to the other. I would say the part that changed it for me was honestly Facebook's interest, which was exciting and alarming. When I first flew out, and the one and only time I've met with Mark Zuckerberg, that was just kind of really drove the whole situation home for me, that this is something people are going to invest in. And I want to be part of building a solution I could feel good about. And so definitely there's so many, I would say, it's an incredible space to work in. Almost every single person I've met really cares about patient impact and about creating a better future, and really not about the money, which is really fantastic. So I think that part was at least the turning point for me, and feeling that, in particular, I had a good team around me. So not all of those people ended up joining full time, but enough did that we were able to, kind of keep going forward from there. But like a little bit the next day, and I was like, oh, I don't have like a lot of money. This is a terrible idea. I'm going to be broke on the side of the street. And definitely there are plenty of times when I felt similarly during COVID, when, all of our studies basically were just completely halted. We couldn't grow, couldn't demonstrate anything. And I absolutely refused to lay anyone off, and was definitely just waiting for, my very unhappy board and to really, bring the pain at some point, but worked through that. So, I mean, definitely there were a number of times where I felt like, this was a really, bad idea. But you just kind of keep going, and it worked out in the end, I suppose. Yes.
I was curious about your transition from Mindex to then BlackRock. Like, what ended up factoring into that decision to sell Mindex and to the entire company somewhat?
Yes. Yeah. That was definitely an important part of it too. So we'd actually had inbound interest in being acquired from 2 other parties previous to that, which I was running in the background, because you always have to know what your exit strategy is. So you're always fundraising if you're CEO, and you're always ready for an exit event in some capacity. So in general, like, you make sure you have your key relationships with people you think might end up acquiring you at some point in the future, or acquisition anyways. And in going through those conversations, really wonderful people, very interesting companies. But really, Florian is someone I've known, for, some time, and his, kind of strength of character and, values are what I wanted to partner with at the end of the day. So definitely was very important that my whole team came, and that there was real investment in the future of the technology that not just we had worked on, but that, many, many years of other scientists and engineers and, and students had contributed to. Yes.
Thanks for the great talk. As you mentioned, to make a successful team, you need different clinicians, engineers, and scientists. So have you seen, or are there any challenges in making sure that everyone's on the same page in terms of specifically what you want to achieve, or the specific ways that you want to hear?
Definitely. And this is I think the most fun part for me is that part is very tricky. Like, how do you do something that is still a little bit science, but mostly ideally engineering, which means that you can plan it for it, you can budget for it, and you can ideally you can control to some degree that outcome. So that's, I think, the most critical part for this type of venture, is that you need to really clearly understand what the scientific risk is and what the, engineering kind of development pathway looks like. And then that helps keep everyone aligned. So there were folks in the team who had, have great science background, like Emily Caparello, and who hadn't really done anything in engineering before. And then myself, who I'm not a neuroscientist, but I've done a lot in, kind of in software engineering and in, data science, machine learning. And so collaborating very closely on, here's kind of the key, kind of value creation points or inflection points for making this technology real, team to write out as part of the initial plan. Yes.
Very inspiring journey. I want to know if this technology can be used for treating any progressive neuro diseases. Like, one of the videos showed like depression at the end or memory loss. Like, instead of terminal like prosthetics, do you envision use of your technology for limiting any of the progressive diseases that is more prevalent in society?
Yes, definitely. And I think there's also, there's someone here from Ripple today. Hi. I think Ripple's doing some cool stuff in this space too. Definitely, as we think more not just about kind of, unidirectional BCIs, not just BCIs that take signals out of the brain, but BCIs that put, signal back into the brain. That's a really exciting space. So just talking with some, folks the other day about, facial nerve, reconstruction by a BCI and how we through closed loop stimulation. So that's definitely on the roadmap. That is a complicated FDA pathway, but the technology already exists, is well vetted, and it's definitely something that BlackRock is actively developing right now.
I actually have 2 questions for you.
Oh yes, Jessica.
Where do you see the technology going in 3 and 5 years? What do you think can be achieved in this field?
Yeah, so definitely there's going to be the first, kind of commercial BCI, I think, for spinal cord injury and ALS patients. And that's going to be enable, you to control your computer, to do communication capabilities. I think that's a no-brainer. I think what we're going to see ideally is more than one of those, because again, it is a good thing to have competition, because it keeps us all, kind of on our toes, and also it gives more options to patients. Like, that is incredibly important. So I think we'll have more than one of those. I do hope we're the first ones to market, but we'll see. I do think Synchron's technology is really interesting. If they can overcome some of those safety concerns, I think that could be a really, really interesting kind of complement to some of the technologies that are already a little more strongly vetted. I think beyond that, I'm definitely hopeful that around the 5-year mark, we'll have the first, kind of real, multi, larger scale, kind of non-invasive, high spatial temporal resolution device. So Kernel has been building something very similar to the digital holographic imaging technology we did with MindX, like a time domain near-infrared spectroscopy. Has a lot of similar characteristics. Focuses mostly on some of the kind of more blood flow related metrics, but that's an incredibly rich signal. And I think that we're going to see a lot more of the kind of mental health applications and whatnot that are able to be leveraged off of those kind of near to neural signal decoding devices. I personally am also very excited now in my kind of next chapter. I'm also being in DC. I was very much focusing on data privacy and ownership rights. So I'm probably maybe one of the things I'm most excited about for this year is working on some policy components. And really, I think there's a lot, and I'm not the only person working on this. There are people who have been publishing on this for many, many years. But how can we write those, kind of rules into the technology from the outset? Like, how can we avoid some of the challenges that we've watched play out with social media and with, the challenge of kind of policing and understanding, social kind of interactions on the internet. So that's a core strategy both for my work at BlackRock, and I think in the industry as well, as people really want to do it a little bit better this time, ideally. So I think that's definitely something we'll see a lot more movement on in the next couple of years.
Awesome, thank you.
Okay.
You mentioned DARPA as part of your funding process as you grew. How critical was it to get that good funding from the government versus venture capital? Was it any different? And do you see the space here growing with the launch of programs like ARPA?
Yes. Oh, ARPA-H. I'm excited about that too. So yes, DARPA's investment is incredibly important. I mean, the space wouldn't exist without it. So just the fact that DARPA puts, like hundreds of millions of dollars into it is the main reason that MindX existed, that BlackRock, technology exists. And that is something investors take into consideration when they're looking at a new, like a deep tech kind of initiative. Similar kind of concepts in AI and self-driving cars, that sort of thing. You always have DARPA investment. And I think, sometimes people forget that there's many, many years of taxpayer dollars that are funneled into these technologies before you can really do that translational component. So that continues to be critical, and continuing to fund our research laboratories is an absolutely critical part of that as well. Securing DARPA funding as a startup is very hard. So what you definitely have to do is partner with bigger, academic institutions to join one of those efforts. There are, like SIBRS, which is a translational technology kind of grant. And I would definitely say that balancing investor capital with non-dilutive capital is the best strategy. If you can manage to run the whole company with non-dilutive capital for a while, that might even be a better one. It kind of allows you to chart your own kind of course until you are ready for that, kind of commercialization point. So similar kind of companies, Mojo Vision is a very cool company that's doing augmented reality contact lenses. And again, very important to also, build relationships with founders in kind of analogous industries, hard problems to solve. Lots of investment required. DARPA's and the DoD funded initiatives are a big part of that. So definitely those kind of long-term funding strategies should be a part of your plan, most likely, unless you're Elon Musk or you're, wildly independently wealthy.
It seems that neurotech is now focusing on the health field, but are there groups that are focused on like bringing sensor pressures to customers? Like instead of treating diseases.
Oh, interesting. So yes, and I'm gonna. So there's a lot of interest in building or expanding technologies like gaming, for example, or even communication, enhancing the human experience, not just kind of correcting, kind of or modifying, kind of things we already know in terms of mobility or communication, that sort of thing. So there's a number of different startups, a lot of software kind of based or data science companies around how do we understand, or actually Kernel does work on this too, related to neuromonitoring. How do we understand someone's level of engagement? How do we understand their kind of interest and intention, and how can we direct that as well? I think it's at least for me personally, has been is a bit of a mixed bag in terms of how do we draw the line. We don't really understand how the brain works that well. Are we making, big assumptions that aren't controlled? The medical device pathway is really hard and really expensive, but the good thing is that it forces you to think about the benefit to someone else, and you have the FDA there also to kind of balance your go-to-market trajectory. So it's been interesting, I spent time, raising money from all the big Silicon Valley folks, and definitely, get my fair share of, conversations where I was just like, oh my goodness, like if this person could absolutely reach into your brain and make you do something, they would do it. That wouldn't even, they wouldn't think about that for a second. So it's definitely that is the area where we will need to invest a lot in the science and in our, kind of mutual understanding. So another part of why I think, joining BlackRock was the right choice is it, does focus on a very clear clinical efficacy endpoint, and allows us to really make the technology more robust, gives us more time to understand, representations in the brain, understand, what the kind of drivers are behind some of these signals. Okay. Yes.
That's very interesting part. So on IT side, maybe for the students who to learn, especially on the about software, how to protect if they come with some innovative idea, how to protect their IP. It's really expensive to come up with a patent that kind of level. And also, there are a lot of professors, so how you present your company?
That's a great question. So actually, it is a great idea to do that while you are in the Hopkins ecosystem. Because it is incredibly expensive to build an IP portfolio, and Hopkins will do that for you. So, filing an invention disclosure, working with the tech transfer office, they have, enormous resources to help you develop that, and that is their, kind of sole or one of their most important missions. So, being part of that kind of pipeline, and I know, is there someone from Tech Ventures here today by any chance?
They're going to be coming in.
Okay. Well, someone will come later, but definitely making that relationship is important, and they want to see all the technologies that brilliant people here have invested in, come to fruition and make an impact. So whether that's a technology you invent or a technology you want to license, and be a part of, an effort outside of the university ecosystem, that's the group to work with. In terms of open source, technology, definitely, open source is part of both incredibly, successful, proprietary companies and, fully open companies as well. So definitely, leveraging those. There's a whole kind of domain expertise around how to vet and select the right open source libraries and whatnot. And if that's, of interest, I could send some kind of follow-up information on that too. But definitely there are a ton of, and I'm sure you guys are already using a lot of, the existing kind of libraries and toolkits that exist for machine learning, and some of the open neuro data sets for that as well. So that's definitely a great place. You want to reduce the investment you have to put into demonstrating a proof of concept, as quickly and cheaply as possible. So leveraging those resources is definitely pretty critical. Okay. All right. Well, thank you all so much.